Yeah, I'm short. Okay. Well, hello everybody. My name is Julie Ward and I'm British. I'm a Labour politician. I represent the northwest of England, which includes the very large cities of Liverpool and Manchester, which of course are famous for sport, art, culture. I'm in the European Parliament. I have been on the Education and Culture Committee and also the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. And I'm really pleased to be here. I'm a member of Culture Action Europe, so it's great to participate in this JAM event. So I'm hoping you have some questions. What do I do? Do I need to do that? Okay. Okay, now I see the questions. Great, thank you. So Yasmina, she asked me a question about Brexit. She asked, did Brexit happen because people lost faith in the power of the EU to safeguard their rights, values and identities? And is there something that could have been done in a better way? Well, first of all, I want to say that Brexit was not a vote against Brussels or the EU. Many people in the UK did not understand or know what the EU does for them, and they weren't voting against the EU. It was a kind of protest vote by many communities because they felt that they had been forgotten about. But what is so ironic about the Brexit vote is that the regions that voted for Brexit are generally the regions that had most investment from the EU. This is a terrible irony because Westminster politicians punished these regions because they were generally Labour, socialist voters. And so I think that when David Cameron fronted the campaign for Brexit, he was a Conservative politician and he had ushered in the era of austerity and very fragile working conditions, uncertainty, precarious work. And so I think many Labour voters felt that they could not vote for something that David Cameron was asking them to vote for. So there's a very difficult psychology behind the Brexit vote. However, I do want to address some of the issues that you mentioned in your question, because what has become apparent through the Brexit negotiations is that our rights as EU citizens have become bargaining chips. And this is shameful on both sides of the negotiations. It's shameful that neither the UK government nor the EU, in the first instance, safeguarded the acquired rights of citizens whose lives were made very difficult because of the Brexit vote. So, for example, if you're an EU 27 citizen and you're living and working and paying into the tax economy in the UK, you now have to apply to have less rights than you already have. And if you are a British citizen in an EU 27 country, your future is very uncertain. And so I think what this process has done is to expose the fact that the EU currently doesn't safeguard our rights and that it needs to do better. And I hope that the next Parliament and the next Commission will work on this and really put citizenship at the heart of their programme. Regarding values and identity, I think that's slightly different from rights, because European values are enshrined in the treaties, and European values of respect, tolerance, democracy, the four freedoms as well, the freedom of movement. These things are very, very important. And human rights and the Charter of Fundamental Rights that the EU has is very, very crucial, actually. And many people, again, don't understand how these things have been challenged by the line that Theresa May has taken. She's taken a very hard line in the Brexit negotiations. She wants to pull us out of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, as well as pull us out of the EU, out of the single market, out of everything. And identity is an interesting one, because I feel we can have many identities. You know, I consider myself to be a global citizen. I'm European, I'm British, I'm Northern British. I identify with cities, with localities, and none of those things weakens the other. So I think what we have to do is to learn more about each other's cultural backgrounds, sharing each other's lives more, and be proud of our multiple identities. You know, as a woman, I am not just a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a politician, I'm a sister, I'm an artist as well. I worked in theatre before I worked in politics. And I think we can have many identities. And I think we need to be proud Europeans, and we need to demonstrate, I think, what it means to be European and to be a proud European. And I think that is about welcoming others. It's about recognizing our history, and that includes our difficult history. For me, Europe is a peace project, and I think we have to constantly restate that. So I hope I've answered your question. Linda, you're asking a question about specific measures. What specific measures are we planning to strengthen the cohesion of European societies through art and culture? Well, I'm very proud that in my Culture and Education Committee, we managed to increase the budget for culture, and also to support the idea of a European common education area. And we have done a lot of work, a lot of reports, and had a lot of conferences and listened to a lot of experts at various hearings about the importance of learning citizenship. So I certainly think that the Parliament, working very closely with the Commission, has really understood this over the past 5 years. We also had the Year of Cultural Heritage, and that wasn't just about the past, that's very much about how that makes us feel today and how we can go forward in the future. So these things, I think, have become much more to the fore. Involved in that is also the importance of media literacy and digital literacy, because we do know that the media has kind of been infiltrated by fake news, by lots of lies, mistruths. We know that there's a lot of social media trolls, a lot of hacking, a lot of breaches of cybersecurity, and that also has to be part of the work that we do with young people. And I'm also an advocate of lifelong learning, so I would say that this has to happen throughout our lives. We always have to be strengthening our learning about how the world is changing, and we have to be giving opportunities all the time for people to return to learn. You're talking about the Future of Europe Summit, and so this is a question from Cornelia. The Future of Europe Summit in Sibiu in Romania is coming up. Are our current politicians aware of the role of culture in the future of Europe? Well, I think they're much more aware now than they were before, and that's because the battles that we're having in Europe are very much battles about our identity. So our culture has become even more important. And I also would like to say that having been to Romania a couple of times, I'm very conscious of the fact that Romanians have a very identifiable, very strong culture. And I know that they're very proud that they're hosting the presidency, and that they will certainly ensure that culture is at the forefront of discussions. And that's also interesting in the context of the European Capitals of Culture, where, of course, Timișoara is going to be a capital of culture in the future. And that's a great prize for Romania, but it's also been a great prize for the other cities who are capitals of culture. And the capitals of culture are never in the capital cities. They're always in some smaller cities perhaps where there's deprivation, where there's a lot of work to do about community cohesion. So that also answers the other question I was talking about in terms of community cohesion. What's happened there? Some things. A question from Paul de Klerk. What do I think about the risk of cultural institutions sponsored by the oil industry? Does it allow for the greenwash of these companies and give them the status of respectable players? Well, Paul, I'm a supporter of the fantastic campaign, Art Not Oil. I have been working quite closely with a brilliant organisation based in London called Platform, who have been working for years on environmental issues and big business. And I know that if a company gives a small amount of money, it might be 100,000, that's a small amount of money for Shell or one of these large companies. If one of these large companies gives a small amount of money to have their name and their logo on an exhibition or in a catalogue, that is an enormous amount of advertising for them at a very small price. And I think it is completely unacceptable for us to have our large cultural institutions or any of our cultural institutions financed by fossil fuels. So I would agree with you on that. And I think we have to really push to get the arts institutions to separate out and to be much more ethical about where their money is coming from. Right, Sophie, in the education chat room, we've been talking a lot about informal and non-formal learning, to which culture and arts are strongly associated. So do I think the EU should introduce a form of validation and recognition of skills learned in such forms of education? Well, Sophie, you're really talking to the right person here. As when I was in school, I failed everything, but I'm not a failure. And my learning was largely through informal education, through youth theatre activities. I didn't learn in the same way that other people learned. I was a much more kinesthetic learner. I wasn't comfortable sitting down in a classroom doing rote learning. I liked projects. I didn't like exams. But I am totally dedicated to lifelong learning. And I really feel that we have to recognize the importance of that. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean exams and, tests, but yes, people who want to continue to learn throughout their lives and learn not necessarily in education institutions, but maybe outdoors and in lots of different community settings. Those forms of learning can completely transform how you feel about yourself, about your confidence, about your abilities to strike out and be really ambitious about your life. And I hope that I'm a role model in that respect, because I didn't go to to university until I was 52. And it took me all those years of doing lots of informal education activities to get me to the place where I felt I was ready to go to university. So absolutely up with you on that one. Sorry, looking at some more questions. Another one about Brexit from Lucy Suzova. Do I think that education and its role will be recognised and prioritised by politicians to prevent a similar situation in the future, and what measures should we introduce? Well, you see, I don't think that we lost the referendum in 2016. I think we lost the referendum years ago because in Britain, we failed to have any decent citizenship education for years and years and years. And I was working with young people, involving them in arts and culture, getting them to think about European values, to meet their European partners through mobility and exchange projects that use the arts and culture as a tool for citizenship and transformation. And I know that the work that I was doing made a difference to those young people, and they were young people from deprived communities. And I believe that if we'd had those kinds of programs paid for by the state, in public education, with really properly motivated, trained teachers, we could have made a massive difference. And I really think it's going to play an absolutely huge role in the future. We cannot allow politics to be just left up to the politicians. We have to ensure that all our citizens understand their rights and responsibilities, both at local level, at state level, at European level, and also at a global level because of issues like climate change and refugees and a whole load of other things that really affect us at global level. Important question from Julie Lomax. How can we influence the UK government to stay in creative Europe? Well, I'm a Labour politician, and I would say let's change the government, because whilst we have a Conservative Party in the UK who are really playing to their UKIP rump, they perceive anything European to be propaganda. And I'm fighting for us to stay in creative Europe. I know how important it is for all the arts organisations to continue working with their European partners. But Creative Europe, along with all the other EU programmes, is a programme that espouses European values. And so we need the government to believe in European values. And I don't see the Conservative government at all wanting any kind of European values to be playing out in the future. So I think it's really, really incumbent on all the cultural institutions, people working at grassroots level, to try and have better politics in the UK. Politics that demonstrates that actually we cannot ignore the fact that we in the UK are in Europe. We might be across a body of water, but in the 21st century, we need to be working together with our partners. And we have to also recognise that our creative and cultural industries contribute a huge amount of money to our GDP. And that European values should also be British values. And if you put all that together, then actually Brexit doesn't make sense, does it? We should be in Europe leading. We shouldn't be outside of Europe just looking across the water. So I'm putting all this together from my perspective to try and continue fighting for a people's vote, for a referendum on whatever deal Theresa May manages to bring back to the people. I think it's very important that the people in the UK have another vote, because when we did have the referendum, people had no idea what they were really voting about. They didn't know what kind of Brexit we might have, and now they see the mess that we're in, maybe they would change their mind. And I think particularly people who love music, everybody loves music, and we've seen how crucial it is to the music industry, and particularly for touring bands and for new young musicians, freedom of movement, being able to move very quickly, very easily from country to country, to put together a tour that works economically and logistically. Actually, we need to be in the EU to do that. So I'm going to keep fighting for us primarily to stay in the EU, or if not, to stay in all the programs that benefit our creative and cultural industries. There's a question here from Juliet about music. It's about live music stakeholders and policymakers and the dialogue between them being crucial. Talking about some programs that exist, but just talking about their administrative complexity and how that prevents small structures accessing such programs and making their voice heard. So how should MEPs work with these structures? Well, I'm an MEP who likes to be very hands-on, and I like people to lobby me, and I have always given my voice, my office, and my capacity and my resources to smaller organizations. And lots of MEPs are very open to those dialogues, to those conversations. So invite us to events, ask to have meetings with us, suggest to us events that we could host in the Parliament where we can explore these issues together. I think lots of politicians will be in the Culture and Education Committee. They might not have come from a cultural background, as I came from a cultural background, but I hope that they would still be up to be educated about the diversity in the sector and how hard it is, if you like, for the smaller organizations to feel that they're making a difference and that they're influencing the policy. Networks are really important. So, become members of networks that can advocate for you. I'm a member of Culture Action Europe, and I was before I was a politician. I'm still a member. So make sure that you set up or buy into those networks, get involved in those networks, have lots of conferences here in Brussels too, or in Strasbourg, where you can invite people. I should also say that there is an organisation within the European Parliament called Friends of Music, European Friends of Music. And several times a year, MEPs have a concert that they're invited to where musicians come and play. And if you know of any musicians that would like to perform at those events, then get in touch with me and I could put your name forward, I could host you. Right, more questions. Here's a question about agricultural sectors. This is a question from Maria. She's talking about Sardinia, and I don't really know much about Sardinia, but I can perhaps talk more generally. Where's the question gone? I think she was talking about regions, and I think maybe I could answer that question. The EU always looks to the regions, and its regional development program is very concerned with the more peripheral regions and how to raise them up and to try and bring them into a better economical shape. And tourism and agriculture plays a huge role in that. I'm also on the Regional Development Committee, so I've been able to see how regional development programs have made a massive difference at regional level. And that's important because often politicians in a capital city or in the seat of power, which is far away from those regions, don't necessarily think first and foremost about how to make things better at a regional level. But the other really great thing about the EU and regional development is that it really champions the very distinctive culture that regions have. So through, for example, minority languages, you know, in the UK, we've got Wales, and Welsh culture and the Welsh language is hugely, hugely important. So that's true right across the EU, where the regional development programme is always looking to say, what are the special things about the regions and how can we really give them a good push. Maybe talk about Bosnia, Herzegovina and Southeast Europe. This is a question from Shreko. I have been very privileged to be on the delegation for relations with Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo. And so I've spent quite a lot of time in those countries, and I have spent my time there both as a politician at meetings with other politicians, with the government, but I've also engaged hugely with grassroots organizations, with NGOs, with civil society, with women in those countries and with young people. And what I've observed is that in many cases, the same people who ran the war are still running the peace, that we really need to tackle corruption, and we need to change the way that politics happens, and we need to give young people hope. And I think that it's very important to have visa liberalization, for example, and I've been fighting for that in Kosovo, and I want to make sure that that's rolled out to other countries. And that's not because I want young people in those countries to abandon their homeland, but I do want them to have the opportunities that their peers in other parts of Europe have, to travel, to learn, to study, to exchange, and to grow themselves, to learn, to bring back projects and ideas to their own countries, but also to encourage people from other parts of Europe to come to those countries, to invest, to run projects, and to share in learning and joint programs. I believe Europe is a peace project, and I think it's very, very important that we build better democratic structures, so that we don't have the kinds of ethnic violence that we had before. And I just see enormously amazing opportunities in those incredibly beautiful Western Balkan countries, you know, to be, if you like, the new European partners that we could be working with much more closely. And of course, that's really, really important in terms of culture, but also really, really important in terms of Erasmus Plus as well, which is the program that supports mobility, because all these countries can participate in Erasmus Plus projects. So I probably need to go down a bit, maybe onto the second page. Okay, maybe you can choose one more question. Oops, I'm trying here to find two. I would just want to say thank you for your questions anyway. In my opinion, what is culture? Shall I maybe finish with that one? Well, what is culture? You know, it's not fixed. Culture is not fixed. It's always changing. It is for us to make culture, and we shouldn't be afraid of mixing it up, mashing it up, and getting it out of the box. It shouldn't always be happening in places, in culture houses, but it's what happens on the streets too. It's about the food that we eat. It's about our traditions. It's not just bricks and mortar and buildings. It's also traditions. It's not necessarily tangible all the time, but it is very much about how we identify ourselves, and it's about the outward expression of who we are as a person, but who we are as a community. And in fact, the question before that was about women's role in public life and in culture, and just also to address that, I think that there's some really important projects that have been happening that have demonstrated that women need to take a greater leadership role in a whole range of different public activities, and culture is part of that too. There was a wonderful music project that demonstrated that women should be leading in terms of music programming and music festivals and as composers, and that's not necessarily always the case. And it's the same in many sectors, I would say, where women can be super active at lower levels, but they're not always achieving that highest position. And as I'm a feminist, I want to make sure that we've got more women visible in public life, and that means more women at the top of our cultural institutions too. Thanks.
Okay.